to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, May 5th, 2015. Happy Cinco de Mayo. And we're going to be, celebrating a little bit later on in the day here. It's also the anniversary of Alan Shepard's flight. On the Mercury program, the second human being into space after Yuri Gagarin, that we know of. And before we get into the news here, quick little program note. We're going to have a guest in the third hour, Maryam Azizi. She's been on the show before talking about human rights and family law in Israel, and she has got some on-the-ground information about what's been going on with the oppressed Ethiopian minorities who are now rioting in Tel Aviv, much as the way we're seeing riots in Baltimore and other cities across the country. So it's all gelling up together here. Now then, a reminder, on Thursday, Gilad Otzman, who is just kicking off his U.S. book and music tour, is going to be our guest talking about this new book that he's got out. And he sent me a pre-release copy. It's very funny. I'm not going to give you any spoilers here, but we're going to be having a little bit fun with that story. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now then, obviously, the top story is this mega puke factor 9.9 bovine excrement alert. It's all over the corporate media. ISIS claims responsibility for the Texas attack. Actually, no. The part they're not telling you, it's Rita Katz and Site Intelligence Group that put out an announcement that somewhere on one of these Islamist websites they had found somebody saying, we're responsible for the attack in Texas. It's the first one of many yet to come. They're ramping up the booga booga as hard as they can. But if anything goes through Rita Katz and Site Intelligence, you know it's Israeli propaganda. It is a hoax. Now then, let's talk about the almost attack. Remember, nothing actually happened. The two patsies got killed, which happens to patsies, like Lee Harvey Oswald and Timothy McVeigh. But nothing else actually happened. If this was supposed to be the new Charlie Hebdo attack, it fizzled, they botched it, but they're still out there trying to grind this thing for as much fear factor as they can to get you so scared of ISIS that you will cling to daddy government and give them your money and your children. Oh, save us from the horrible terrorists. And remembering, of course, that our civilian police are actually murdering 55 times as many innocent Americans as the terrorists are, and that's including the body count from 9/11. All righty. Now, it turns out the police in Garland, Texas, were given a warning that something was going to happen around this event 2 days before it happened. Okay? 2 days. And did not take any precautions. The red flag was missed, is what they're saying. Okay? Now, we are now finding out that Elton Simpson, the primary perpetrator here, was being handled by a paid FBI informant identified as Mr. Daba Deng. He's a Kenyan. Starting in 2007, he was paid by the FBI $132,000 to become friends with Mr. Simpson, groomed him through a local mosque, and helped and basically urged Simpson about jihad. It's another one of these manufactured FBI setups. So it is. It's a fraud. It's a fake here. But just for a moment, let us put all that information down. Let's put down the long history of FBI manufacturing enemies for us to be afraid of. Emmanuel Goldsteins or whatever. Let's put it all down. Let us, for the purpose of a thought experiment, presume that we're being told the absolute truth, that ISIS is here and they almost shot up this cartoon contest in Garland, Texas. Okay, we know the Texas police had advance warning. They didn't stop them. The FBI is admitting they were watching this guy. They didn't stop him. The NSA didn't stop him. If we accept the official government story at face value, an act of utter naivete and stupidity, but setting that aside, if we accept the government story at face value, it basically tells us that all of that security, spying, surveillance, Doesn't work. Huge waste of money. Absolutely did not work again. And it should be scrapped, because it is, after all, unconstitutional. The government's not supposed to be peeking into our private lives without a good reason. And they're peeking into our lives. They're making sure that we're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. And they missed the terror attack. Again. Just like with Boston, if you buy the official story about the Boston bombing. Didn't the FBI, who were monitoring the Tsarnaev brothers, didn't they fail? Didn't the police fail? Didn't the NSA fail? They're batting zero, right? Of course, it makes a lot more sense that Boston bombing, like Oklahoma City and Garland, Texas, are just more of these manufactured false flag staged terror attacks to scare us into just clinging to Big Daddy government for protection. Now, it turns out the location for this cartoon contest was very carefully picked. It's basically considered a hotbed for anti-Muslim bigotry. And they were basically being down there. Now, Pamela Geller is out there trying to say that she's a champion of freedom of speech. I'm defending freedom of speech by, sponsoring a contest to draw insulting cartoons about somebody else's religion. And even the Los Angeles Times came out and said, Geller is not a critic of Islam. Her goal is to cleanse the Western world of Muslims, along the same way that Slobodan Milosevic wanted to cleanse the Balkans of the Muslims. In other words, her goal is to get the Christians to kill all the Muslims, to make the world safe for the Jews. And there are a whole bunch of articles out there basically going after Pamela Geller. She's getting her moment in the sunlight, in the spotlight. She's getting her 15 minutes of fame, and it's backflashing on her because everybody's digging into her past. Another article we saw, even CNN, don't be fooled by Pamela Geller. And basically goes back over all the claims that she's made about how Obama is the love child of Malcolm X. And they took her to task for making the comment that the attackers at the cartoon contest, are basically acting on behalf of all American Muslims. Well, first of all, that's a bit of a leap. Because at the time of the attack, these two patsies were not part of any mosque. They weren't part of any Muslim community. They had basically stopped going to the mosques because the Muslims in the mosques don't like violence, and they don't want these kind of people around, especially when they suspect one of them is another one of these paid FBI informants trying to set them up. Pamela Geller is not celebrating freedom of speech. She went out to intentionally anger and insult Muslims so that there would be a response that she could point at and say, see, they're bad people. And that, by the way, is a very common trick we see among the Israelis. They'll poke at you and poke at you and poke at you until you respond and they say, aha, see, that proves that you're an anti-Semite. And Geller's doing exactly the same thing with the Muslims. Even Donald Trump came out to say, Geller, what are you doing? We saw how this kind of imagery triggered the Charlie Hebdo attack. You were basically setting up all those people at the cartoon contest to be killed. You got them in a building, you taped kick me signs all over their backs, and stood back to wait for somebody to get killed for political gain. And that's exactly what she did. Now, a lot of people have come in and said, oh, wait a minute, we're going to grab a quick phone call. Actually, Mo, I'm sorry, we're almost at the commercial break, but I'm going to keep you through the commercial break, and as soon as we come back, I'll take your phone call here, but I wasn't watching the clock here. When we come back, Mo's phone call, and some information about Pamela Geller's background that you may not be aware of. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to Mo in Florida here, I just want to catch up on this. A lot of articles about Pamela Geller coming out about her, the person, what kind of person she is. A lot of people asking, where does she get the money for all these bus placards? Where does she get the money to hire all these lawyers to go into court and say it's free speech for me to put up all this hate-mongering stuff against Muslims on the buses and everything? She does have financial supporters, and because of the way she runs her operation, they are concealed from view. But it turns out Pamela Geller is wealthy on her own. She got $4 million in her divorce settlement from Michael Rivero. The divorce settlement included that he had to maintain a life insurance policy on himself for her, and shortly after the divorce, boy, lucky for Pamela, he died under some questionable circumstances, and she got an additional $5 million, plus part of the money from the sale of the home that they had shared together. So she's loaded. She lives on an entire floor of an Upper East Side condo in New York, and those things are not cheap. And so she's running around here with all this money and saying, God gave me this money for a noble purpose, and the noble purpose is to cleanse the planet of Muslims. I really do think that too much money piled up in one space inevitably leads to great evil. All right, we're going to finally get back to the phone. Mo in Florida, thank you for your patience in waiting. What's on your mind?
Thank you for holding me over, Michael. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Good, Michael. Just a marketing question here. I didn't want to go ahead without your permission, but I know I got this from you, so I was going to make some T-shirts up that says, ISIS is going to get you. And I didn't want to do that without giving you the first opportunity to start printing the T-shirts. And I'll buy them from you.
Well, I'll tell you what, go ahead and do it, and whatever you want. It's not like it's hardly an original idea with me. My only recommendation would be to have a couple of clawed hands and some scary eyes above it, because it really is. It's booga booga. They're trying to, Al-Qaeda sort of faded as a usable villain because everybody started to realize that Al-Qaeda in Arabic slang means a toilet, which shows the poor planning that the propagandists were doing back then. So they've remanufactured a new uber enemy, ISIS, Islamic State. They're trying to start all this thing. And it is. It's just a constant booga booga. We're going to go on doing all these scary things here, and I'm sure all these CIA and Mossad and people say, how many more innocent people are we going to have to murder before they'll go to war against Muslims? And
Michael, how about, I totally agree, but it is your idea, the way you, first of all, I think one question, I don't know how to spell cha. Is it C-H-A or getcha? G-E-T-C-H-A?
Could be C-H-A, could be C-H-E. Or K, it could be G-I-T-Y-A. It's up to you. Indulge your creative muse.
Okay. And I think the picture, you gave me some good ideas, but I think the pictures of some little kid looking under the bed and a guy with a turban under there.
Oh, that'd be a good one. I like that. That's a good one. Okay?
Oh, Michael, this, you know what? I'll let you go because I know you like to move along, but, this whole thing with, this whole fear thing is just, if people didn't wake up after 9/11 with the weapons of mass destruction, I really don't have a lot of hope in this country. I'm thinking, these people, you cannot cure stupid.
Well, you cannot cure belief. Stupid can be cured. Belief, usually not. But that being said, I think the biggest mistake that anybody can make, or especially the government, is to confuse silence in the population for agreement and consent. Because the more you talk with people around you, you're going to realize that the vast majority of Americans have picked up on what's going on, especially the younger people. Even that Harvard poll showed only 2% of the 19 to 29-year-olds think the corporate media can be trusted. And that's a very telling number here. But people are staying silent because of politeness, because they're not sure how others around them are going to respond. But once you start the conversation going, it all comes out. We make little jokes and everybody laughs. They know what's going on. They understand that this country has gone down a horrible, horrible path. It's just like being in Germany and watching Hitler start to tear that place apart. We're going through exactly the same thing here again, and sadly it's going to wind up the same way. Anyway, listen, Mo, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. I want to get back here on to Pamela Geller, because there's a lot of articles out there. Let's see, even ABC came out saying cartoon contest organizer Pamela Geller known for inflammatory rhetoric. And get this, the Southern Poverty Law Center lists her as an extremist. And for the Southern Poverty Law Center to come out and say, yeah, you're out there, then you are definitely out there. All right. Now, let's see, other articles we're looking at, Huffington Post. I want to correct something here, okay, because one of the major aspects of this propaganda campaign that we're seeing, whether it's Charlie Hebdo or down in Texas, is this idea that Islam forbids any depiction of the Prophet. And it turns out that's not actually true. Judaism forbids any depiction of God. That's absolutely forbidden. There's nothing in the Quran that says you cannot draw a picture of the Prophet Muhammad. And as a matter of fact, I did a web search and I found scans of antique Islamic depictions of Muhammad. It is discouraged because Islam wants to avoid idolatry. And actually, they're very much aligned with the Protestants along that same area. Because remember, all of these religions go back to Abraham. And the original Ten Commandments said not to make any graven images. Now, the Catholics are real big on graven images, so they threw that commandment out and they came up with this other one to take its place. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. That comes as a shock to a lot of people, that the Ten Commandments are actually different depending upon which religion that you're looking at. But, you know, the Muslims and Protestants are actually very much on the same page about not wanting a lot of idolatry. So depictions of the Prophet, they're discouraged, but they're not actively blocked. And American Muslims are out there saying, yeah, if you want to draw Muhammad, that's okay. The problem is, what was being drawn by Charlie Hebdo and what was being drawn down in Texas were intentionally insulting depictions. Okay? And religious people do get upset about that. Easter, I have this graphic, I put up the secret origin of the Easter rabbit. Boy, I get all kinds of nasty mail for that. Okay? And so, you know, Pamela Geller is trying to punch their button. She wants a response and then screams the response, oh, see, that proves how bad and evil the Muslims are. And interesting article in the Daily Beast where Muslims defend Pam Geller's right to hate, saying, yeah, you know, she wants to be that way, she can be that way. And the good news is she's that way on full display on the public. More about this when we come back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this very obvious, botched, false flag where Pamela Geller, hate monger extraordinaire, was out there intentionally trying to anger Muslims, to get a response to use to demonize them, by having this contest to draw pictures of Muhammad, to make fun of him, to insult him, right down there on the same level as Charlie Hebdo was doing. And by the way, Charlie Hebdo did the same thing with Christian icons, Jesus and the Pope. But that's okay. That's First Amendment protection and everything. Now, there's been a big to-do about some of Pamela Geller's ads in New York. The judge ordered the buses to keep them up there. New York Transit has now said there's going to be a policy from now on. No political advertising of any kind, period, end of discussion, because they're tired of being Pamela Geller's canvas. Now, it wasn't all that long ago, over in Seattle, the transit system there accepted ads that were questioning U.S. support for Israel's war crimes against Palestine, which is a pretty accurate description of what's been going on. It's not a hate-mongering ad, but of course the whiners called up the Seattle transit system and said, you know, it's anti-Semitic, it's hate speech, it's blah, 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 and the Seattle transit system took the ads down. They were sued, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld Seattle's transit system's right to refuse the advertising. Do you see the double standard going on here in the United States of America? It's okay to draw insulting pictures about Mohammed, or for that matter, Jesus or the Pope or Buddha. Just don't go anywhere near Israel. That's not protected speech under the First Amendment. No. And same thing just happened in Denmark. There were ads questioning the legality of the Israeli settlements in Palestine, and they are illegal under international law. That one got struck down. So we're living in a world right now where freedom of speech means you're free to go out and insult the other people, but don't you dare talk about Israel because they rule the world, whether you like it or not. Because we're here in the United States of America, we're living under a puppet ruler that rules us on behalf of that foreign government, just like Iraq was being ruled by a U.S. puppet ruler, and they're trying to kick him out. Iran was ruled by a U.S. puppet ruler. They did kick him out in 1979. Same thing in Libya, same thing in Yemen. That's what's going on. All these countries are sick and tired of having rulers that are puppets for foreign governments, and they want their countries back. And we need to get our country back from our puppet rulers. Because they're making it obvious. You can't ignore the fact that the First Amendment has now been declared to be selective. You have First Amendment right to freedom of speech. You can even insult the President of the United States of America, but don't you dare say anything bad about Israel. Alrighty, so let's see. Moving right along here. Another article down here at Global Research. Garland shooting Gladio, Texas style. Nobody is buying this whatsoever, but the corporate media is raising on a busted flush, and they're really hitting the idea, this is the first one, there are going to be more, where there's going to be ISIS terror attacks until you agree to fling your children into the battles on the other side of the world. That's what's going on here. Let's go on down to Baltimore. That situation is still very, very tense. Fox News has now apologized for having reported a shooting yesterday that got everybody in a tizzy. And everybody's still very, very tense down there. People are looking about, how basically poverty and a certain degree of racism set the city on fire. Now, the people who are race baiting, pushing that whole racial situation, have a major stumbling block. 3 of the 6 police officers charged in the death of Freddie Gray are themselves black. Okay, you cannot say this is white on black abuse when half the police themselves are black. It really does come down to poverty, wealth inequality, abandonment of the infrastructure. And everybody's out there pounding on this thing for political gain. Obama was out there saying that if the Republican-controlled Congress would implement his policies to make investments in communities, things would have been different. Well, the reality is that Congress did make a massive investment into Baltimore. Under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus, Baltimore got basically $1.8 billion to try and make improvements. Didn't seem to have much of an effect regarding the lives of ordinary citizens. Now, as you know, they're also having race riots over in Israel from the long abuse of the Ethiopian Jews. And Israel's official statement is, well, our racism isn't as bad as yours. Because every time somebody compares what's going on in Israel with other parts of the world, Israel's response is, well, it's not as bad here as elsewhere. Yeah, we're an apartheid state, but South Africa was much worse. Yeah, we're racist, but Baltimore is much worse. I don't really think that's going to get them a lot of traction, coming on out there and saying, yeah, we're doing this, but we don't do it as badly as the other people do. You're still doing bad things out there. SWAT raid results in cops killing unarmed man and his dog in Hollandale Beach, Florida. A lot of that going on, and these stories and the public outcry over police brutality are starting to have an effect. Because the county commissioner in Palm Beach, Florida, took a look at police shooting statistics and found that the police department claimed 97% of officer-involved shootings were perfectly justified. And so Palm Beach County Commissioner Priscilla Taylor is saying they need an independent review board to look at what's going on here. Because very clearly, if an innocent person is killed, there is no justification for that. And the rules are just really absurd now. They were even talking about it on Fox News, where if the police are handcuffing you and you stiffen your arms, that's considered assault on the police officer. The rules and policies are set up to basically protect the police and victimize even the innocent people out there. And again, this is not an issue of race. This is an issue of police brutality totally out of control. We are living in a police state. And it shows our society is breaking down. Because for society to work, for the police to work, the citizens have to see the guilty be punished and nobody else. And these days we see the politically connected guilty seemingly walk free, And the punishment is simply being doled out almost at random to totally innocent people. And that right there is the reason why the American people don't see the police as a benefit, as about law and order or justice or even crime prevention. With out-of-control civil forfeiture, writing traffic tickets for revenue generation, the police are pillaging the population. They're basically operating on the same moral level as Sir Guy of Gisborne's thugs, riding across the countryside, stealing pigs and chickens whenever they feel like it. That's where we are right now. That's how bad things are in this country. It's an issue of police brutality and a government which has completely broken the contract with America, called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And once the government stops following those rules, it's not a legitimate legal government any longer. And that's just something people have got to start understanding and thinking about. We don't have a legitimate legal American government. We have puppet rulers, but we don't have a legitimate government. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to the phones, there's a wonderful quote from Robert Fisk. I have to read it to you. Let me try and get this straight. The Saudis are bombing Yemen because they fear the Shia Houthis are working for the Iranians. The Saudis are also bombing ISIS in Iraq and ISIS in Syria. So are the United Arab Emirates. The Syrian government is bombing its enemies in Syria, and the Iraqi government is also bombing its enemies in Iraq. I hope that clears it up for you. Everybody's bombing everybody and trying to figure out some way they can blame Russia, China, and Iran for it. All right, we're going to grab some phone calls here. Peter in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I just wanted to chime in on what you were saying earlier about the portrayal or how Judaism or Israel can be portrayed in the media. And I was just going to raise a couple of questions to the audience and see when was the last time, I can name you a couple that just jump off the list as to being basically very negative to Christianity or the Catholic Church or whatever, like The Godfather and so on and so forth. And there's a whole lot of movies that negatively portray priests or you know, Christianity and so on and so forth. However, you're right, you never see anything on Israel. The closest thing that I remember seeing was the Mel Gibson movie, Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
Where it was taken right from the Bible, by the way, nothing made up.
Well, you got to tread carefully there, because when the Bible was written, it was written for a Roman audience because they had the money, and they didn't want. They knew they were not going to sell Christianity to the Roman people by saying that the Romans had killed Jesus, deicide. Okay, so that's why the Sanhedrin got the blame. Okay. So the Bible is not accurate in terms of exactly how it was that Jesus came to be convicted of treason and crucified, because that doesn't go over well with the people that you're trying to get to throw money into those collection plates.
Well, granted, and who can tell? I think it's not like I'm pro-Christianity here, but what I'm saying is that it portrayed the Pharisees, at least as it was written, at least in the Bible, which of course in itself is in question. But nevertheless, you remember what a hard time Gibson had in even getting that produced, and how they were saying that the movie in itself was anti-Semitic, and then.
Oh, and then they set him up with that other anti-Semitic thing here. You know, a lot of film students are probably aware of this already. The films of Steven Spielberg, he loves to trash Christmas. He did it in 1941 with the tank running over the plastic Santa Claus. The movie Gremlins took place over Christmas, and it's it's always a little background thing. Let's roll over the Christmas decorations somehow or other, and that's been a constant theme in a lot of his movies. And that's very much an attitude that you get out of Hollywood, which is dominated by one religion over others, and that's a reality, and it's not anti-Semitic to say it. Well, actually, in Hollywood's point of view, it's okay to say the Jews are running Hollywood if you yourself are Jewish. But if anybody else says it, then they're being an anti-Semitic Hitler lover who wants the gas chambers to come back and kill Jewish babies.
Well, even Oliver Stone, who himself is Jewish, and I have a lot of respect for, came out and said that a couple of years ago, and that how they control Hollywood, and then they made him they made him retract that statement.
Yeah, something like 24 hours later. I think they also they did it to one other who came out and made that statement. Oh yeah, your career is gone unless you dive into the power structure. And
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, if you remember, I just want to also point out there's never any negative portrayal ever of rabbis. And even when in the real news, like remember a couple of years ago when there was some Jewish sect that was involved in New Jersey along with a couple of mayors and a congressman who were organ trafficking.
Yeah.
And that barely saw the light of day anyways. Then there's the the whole thing about control of ecstasy trafficking and things just you just never see that ever. But you do see these digs and these undercuts to Christianity, and of course,
well, it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. I mean, Hollywood invariably depicts drug criminals as swarthy South Americans or Mexicans. And never mentions the idea that there are American drug lords in business right now. A lot of people don't know that the Mayor Lansky, the Chicago gangster, was Jewish, because that's never mentioned in the movies about that. It's always Italians are behind organized crime, and it's just one of the many ways in which Hollywood is presenting a very filtered view of the world, so that we will like this particular group and always fear and mistrust this other group, and it really is a very ubiquitous attitude.
It's just completely one-sided, and I just would ask the audience to next time you see any sort of referral or allusion to Christianity or Muslim on TV or the movies, just see how it's portrayed, and then try to remember if you can ever see a rabbi or Judaism portrayed in a similarly negative way.
No, it doesn't happen. It just does not happen. No, it never does. All right, well, listen, I got another caller I got to get to before the news break. So, Peter, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha to you. This whole police brutality thing, like you were saying, I had a brief discussion with some coworkers who are African American, which, by the way, they corrected me and said, no, I'm black.
Okay.
But let's have the discussion. And we talked about the Baltimore thing and went into detail about other things. And the crux of the conversation with them was, I said, don't you think that it's more about police than race? And to my surprise, most of them said yes. They said, yes, I think it's more about police than it is about race.
Well, these are smart people here, and that's why the race baiters aren't getting the traction they would like to get here. We know that because of the negative publicity surrounding the killing of blacks, study done in Washington State showed the police are actually more likely to pull the trigger on a white suspect. But it never gets reported because the corporate media is out there trying to sell this idea that there is a racial divide in this country. And again, this is right out of 1960s COINTELPRO operations. Keep the people divided against themselves so they don't unite against the real cause of all their suffering and hardship, which is Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And they're replaying all the COINTELPRO stunts from the 1960s. The difference is large segment of the population knows that's how the government does these things.
And that was my point to one person who was decidedly that it's about race. And I said, really, it's about race? Okay. Ask me if I've ever been beat down by police. And he asked me, and the answer was yes. And oddly enough, Michael, it was by HPD.
Ah, okay.
I got beat down in front of Moose McGillicuddy's.
Oh, okay.
By an HPD officer.
Yeah, no, it's
I mean, it's not about race. It's about police just inflicting crazy amounts of violence upon people that's unwarranted.
It's the only way they can keep them under control, because all of this looting that's going on, the civil forfeiture, the very expensive traffic tickets that are being written just for revenue generation, this stunt that HPD pulled down in Waikiki a week ago, where the traffic was gridlocked, nobody was actually moving, and the cops are just walking down, writing tickets to anybody using their cell phone, because it is a $290 ticket to use your cell phone while driving. Except, of course, these people weren't driving. And most of them are not going to have the time and resources to go to court to contest the ticket, to go before the judge and say the car was not moving, and they're going to wind up just paying the ticket. And because of things like that, the public doesn't trust the police anymore. And that's why the police are just trying to club us all down. You know, they're really acting like the overseers on a southern plantation.
Well, Mike, you got to get those quotas in. Oh, wait a minute. There are no quotas.
Yes. And here's a ticket for saying there's a quota. Oh man, they were down here on Mauna Lua. They were just lined up writing tickets yesterday. You know, thank goodness I drive this old junky nondescript invisible to common sense car. What can I tell you? All righty, well listen, Michael, I got to let you go. We're coming up here on our top of the hour news break. When we come back, we're going to be getting back to the international war zone, developments in Yemen, Syria. They're trying to get World War III cranked up for real before the economy implodes. We'll be right back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And we've got some callers on the line. I'm going to go right to them here. Dustin in New Jersey, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I don't know if you talked about Iran not going to Victory Day Parade because he's too busy meeting, like, the King of Saudi Arabia.
I hadn't mentioned it, but, they're trying to politicize the Victory Day Parade to express their displeasure for Russia, and they're never going to pass up on any opportunity to, basically just keep selling that idea that we're good and the Russians are bad. They're really trying to get the world back to the Cold War mentality of the 1950s when all the government had to do was wag commies at us and we would wet ourselves and fling our money and our children into battle.
Hey, was Hollande around? Did he let the Germans into France back then?
I have no idea, but, I don't think so. I mean, World War II was before most of us were born. I mean, I'm in my 60s, and World War II was over and done with before I ever set foot on planet Earth.
I think it's a slap in the face to Russia.
Of course it is.
I think it's a disgrace.
Of course it is. Of course it is. They're out there. All of these countries with these private central banks are deeply in debt. They're heading for a crash because this globalist push now has all of them synchronized together. Before, when a country with a private central bank would collapse, the other countries with private central banks would step in, pick it up, and restart the system. Because of globalism, they're all locked together. When one goes down, they're all going to go down. And they know it. That's why now we're seeing Wall Street's credit rating agencies are saying it doesn't matter if Greece doesn't make their payments, we will not call it a default. And they're basically going to screw all those people who bought those credit default swaps against Greece's debt. But it's not going to prevent the ultimate outcome. And all of these countries, U.S., France, Canada, understand that if they are not in a major war with a peer enemy, not slapping around some helpless little country in Africa or the Middle East, but a peer enemy war, if they don't get it before the economy collapses, their populations are going to be getting out the tar and feathers when the economy implodes.
Hey, Mike, you know how you can tell the economy is not doing well? All you have to do is look at the Baltic Dry Index and Caterpillar. And that's all, and that's all you need to look at.
Yeah, the Baltic Dry Index is definitely a giveaway. But again, walk down the street of your home, of your hometown. Take a moment to clear your head, close your eyes for a second, and then open your eyes and look at the town as if you just got there for the first time. Seeing the cracks in the pavement, the rust, corrosion on the street lights, all the empty retail vacancies, and just break out of your cocoon of what you know to be there and just look at your town as if you just arrived for the first time. And you'll see what a terrible condition this country's in right now. The buggy junkies are doing great. They've doubled their wealth in the last 10 years here, but for the rest of us, no.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk real quick about Russia again, about how people don't understand, what we get from them. We get petroleum from them. We get clean coal.
We still are.
Yeah, we get nuclear fuel from them, and then you know what? Boeing
and rocket engines. Rocket engines.
Titanium.
Yeah, we get
titanium.
we get rocket engines from Russia. The United States can't make rocket engines anymore that are reliable. They have to buy them from Russia.
And people just don't understand this. It's like the sanctions are a joke. It's a big joke.
It is. Unfortunately, we're not laughing because too many people are going to die over this.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over here to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just want to comment on a video I saw the other day. It's an old video, but I don't know if you're familiar with this name. Have you ever heard of Myron C. Fagan?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, he pretty much goes a lot of detail of how the elitists created the wars, and he gave a lot of names and he went into great detail for how they orchestrated all the wars, all the riots, step-by-step instructions of how they want to create a new world order. And it was saying some, like, they said they create war in order for people to clamor for peace. And they want to make the war so devastating that people don't want war anymore, so they want to create something to stabilize the situation where they won't have wars anymore, and that's what they try to do with the League of Nations.
Well, yeah, they tried it with the League of Nations, they tried it with the United Nations, but the root cause of these wars are these private central banks that drive a nation into so much debt that conquest is the only way they can keep the system going a little bit longer. And as long as you have private central banks, you will have wars. And there is even a single global government isn't going to fix that, because the New World Order to date is already tearing itself apart because it came with a built-in self-destruct mechanism called the Bank of International Settlements.
Greece.
Okay?
Yeah, okay. I just was wondering if you heard of the name or not.
No, I haven't, and I do disagree with some of his basic theory. If you want to know what my view of that is, all wars are bankers' wars. It's up at the top of the website in the little submenu area, and you can take a look at that. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over here and grab John in Barbados for the rest of this segment. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Tracking back to the Greek situation, I don't think it really matters whether Greece defaults or the European banks give it some write-downs. In either case, there's going to be massive shortfalls in some of these banks, and that will just tip them over the edge into bankruptcy, and we'll see if you like, a cascade collapse of the banking system in Europe, which will travel quickly over the pond to America, and it doesn't really matter which way they jump now. This financial crash is coming.
Yeah, I mean, we're hearing that the Bank of France might offer Greece yet another bailout of instantly created out of thin air euros to make this next payment. But they can only do that so many times before trust in the euro and its value starts to disappear, the way all this quantitative easing in the United States has shaken the world's trust in the value of the U.S. dollar. These emergency measures, it can't become a permanent part of policy. It's just not going to work. The Weimar Republic proved that. And so I know that the Wall Street ratings agencies have already said there will technically be no default regardless of what Greece does to protect the Wall Street financial institutions who sold those credit default swaps. But Greece's default is not going to happen in a vacuum, because all those people who are losing their investment in Greece, who are not getting reimbursed through the credit default swaps, they're going to be in financial trouble. And those financial instruments dependent on them are going to be in trouble, and there's going to be a cascade event. And what we're seeing Wall Street do is not try and deal with the crisis so much as insulate themselves from it.
Well, what I see, Michael, is Greece is quite a small country with a population of about 11 million. Mm-hmm. But Italy and Spain are almost in the same position, if not worse, than Greece. And their populations between the two is over 100 million. And if they crash, that's the end of the system. And I think they will go the same way as Greece once Greece collapses.
We've been hearing that, where some of these other states are already out there saying, we were better off as our own separate country. This European Union was great for the globalists and New World Order people, but it has been an absolute raw deal for the member nations and for the people in those member nations. And I think the grassroots movement is toward more nationalistic views of our country, and we'll take care of our country, you take care of your country, and all this super management globalism just is not working out very well at all. John, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Getting back to the war zone, the United States and Saudi Arabia are now under severe criticism for the use of cluster bombs in civilian areas in Yemen. Now, there is an international treaty banning cluster bombs that is signed by pretty much every nation on Earth, pointedly not the United States, and pointedly not Saudi Arabia. They feel they can go on and use them. The reason this treaty came into being, the reason so many countries signed it, is because it is impossible for cluster bombs to be confined to a legitimate military target. They cause tremendous amounts of collateral damage, civilian lives, especially in the case of these cluster bomb submunitions that do not detonate at the time of the attack, and they just lie on the ground and they will sit there and they'll just go off. Can be years later, killing people and livestock. And so most countries on Earth have signed a treaty to ban them, and it's sort of underscoring the fact that the United States and its ally Saudi Arabia are in fact the rogue nations. But these weapons are internationally condemned, and the U.S. is using them, and is out there literally saying, oh, no, we're absolutely sure we're only hitting legitimate military targets. Which, from the point of view of the United States, is technically correct, because the invasion of Yemen is all about punishing all of the people of Yemen for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler. Back in 2012, the U.S. intervened in Yemen, kicked out the democratically elected President Saleh, installed President Hadi as a U.S. puppet, and the people of Yemen, they gave Hadi the heave-ho. He's over in Saudi Arabia right now. So just like the United States has had to go back into Iraq, just like it's having to go back into Afghanistan, just like it had to go back into Libya, the U.S. is having to go back into Yemen. And because these constant, endless re-invasions are not sitting well with the American people, the U.S. is going through Saudi Arabia as the proxy. But the U.S. is paying for all of this. They're giving Saudi Arabia the cluster bombs. There are now photos of the outer deployment shell from these found on the ground. They're U.S.-made, U.S.-supplied weapons. Now, witnesses are now confirming that, yes, Saudi Arabia ground troops have invaded Yemen, basically at the city of Aden. Now, there were reports of an incursion. Then Saudi Arabia denied it. John in Barbados says his sources are saying that the Yemenite people who are part of the Saudi ground forces, because Saudi Arabia builds its army with hired mercenaries. They got the money to do it. And that apparently the Yemenite members of the Saudi forces deserted, changed sides as soon as they hit the shoreline. But apparently we're seeing witnesses that Saudi special forces are on the ground in Aden, backed up by helicopter gunships. This is not a war against rebels. It's not a war against Houthis. It's not a war against Sunnis. It is a war to reconquer all of Yemen and bring it back under U.S. domination. And this plan to force the world back to Bretton Woods, force it back to the petrodollar, it's already failing. It's already failing. The U.S. is exhausting itself just trying to hang on to what it's got. And in a lot of ways, it mirrors the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, especially after they lost those 3 legions in Germany. And Rome just did not have the military resources to keep control over all of its outlying provinces, and they began to break away. And that's what's going on right now. Now, over in Syria, the U.S. Army is claiming their airstrikes have killed 50 ISIS fighters. Monitors on the ground are saying, no, they got 50 civilians, non-combatants, innocent bystanders. which the U.S. will never admit to. Their attitude is, hey, if our weapons killed him, they had to be a bad guy. It's just an article of faith. We believe that only the bad people are being killed. Now, here's a very interesting article. Came through Investment Watch blog. And they're talking about a guy named Scott Bennett, who is a U.S. Army Special Operations Officer. He's part of the 11th Psychological Operations Battalion, Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command. And basically used to work with defense contractor Booz Allen Hamilton. And he is out there saying ISIS is being funded by the Central Intelligence Agency through Swiss bank accounts. And this is not the first time this information has surfaced. There have been reports of witnesses seeing U.S. military transports delivering supplies and weapons to some of these ISIS groups. ISIS is a manufactured, made-up enemy to be plopped into any country the U.S. wants to invade and militarily conquer. Apparently that includes Garland, Texas now. So they play whack-a-mole across the globe. Oh, there's ISIS. We've got to invade. We're not really invading your country and killing your people. It's just ISIS is there, and we have to go after ISIS because they're really bad people. And Rita Katz and Site Intelligence have the videos to prove to us how bad these people really are. Apparently, up in Kobani, Syria, photos are coming out after the U.S. military action there. The place is totally devastated. People are comparing it with Gaza. John Kerry has paid an unannounced visit to Somalia. This is the first ever U.S. Secretary of State to visit Somalia, huzzah, 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 meaning that Somalia has now been added to the list of to be conquered and given a puppet ruler. As part of the Africa campaign to get all of those resource-rich African nations under our control so those resources are traded only for the U.S. dollar. Now, over in Iran with the P5+1 deal, the people actually negotiating the P5+1 say progress is being made. They're starting work on the final form of the document, heading toward the deadline. Israel and its, well, for lack of a better word, whores in the U.S. Congress are trying to find some way to derail it. Senators Rubio and Cotton have had to pull back from trying to add all these extra amendments to the congressional bill saying we get to say what the UN does over in Iran, which is an exercise in futility. The U.S. Congress has no authority over the United Nations. But they're having to pull back because the bill is already contentious. There are a lot of people in Congress who recognize that this is creating a constitutional crisis. A lot of members of Congress realizing that by directly interfering in foreign policy, that they're violating the Logan Act, and in a just world, they're looking at 3 years in prison. But the Israel lobby is saying they want full access inspections, meaning not just the nuclear facilities, but anything military in Iran. Constant inspections. Spying is what they want. They want a license to spy. And meanwhile, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is once again out there saying that the U.S. claims regarding what is in the Iran nuclear deal are fabrications. When they hit that preliminary deal, that framework agreement earlier, and Obama came out and said, Iran has agreed to this and Iran agreed to that, Iran came out and said, no, that's not in the deal. They're trying to make up agreements for Iran, so when Iran doesn't keep them, they can say, aha, Iran broke the deal, the war is on. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, there is a growing scandal in Israel. Should be here in the U.S., but for some reason, the American corporate media just doesn't find it interesting. But it has to do with this group in Israel. It's a non-governmental organization breaking the silence made up of veterans from the Israeli military. They have been conducting a study since last summer's attempted genocide into Gaza. They've interviewed more than 60 Israeli soldiers, all of whom confirmed not only did they deliberately target innocent civilians during the invasion, they were ordered explicitly by their command chain to do so. That is a war crime, to target civilians during military operations. American media doesn't seem to feel that that's worth mentioning. Yeah, who cares? Yeah, so they kill a few civilians. Who cares? You're just being petty. I remember during the height of that, I had this very tragic photo of a Palestinian man holding the remains of his child. And the whole back of the child's head is just gone. And I put it up there and I said, this is what your tax dollars is reporting. And I got these emails, very irate, and a lot of them tracked back to IPs in Israel saying, as long as you have that picture up there, I will not be reading your site. And my reply was always, I'll miss you. Now, there's an alarming story here over on antiwar.com where in the midst of all of this revelation that Israeli soldiers deliberately targeted Palestinian civilians, non-combatants, children, were ordered to do so, Lieutenant General Benny Gantz is basically saying the next time we go in, it's going to be worse. And Israel's justification for targeting 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and the rest of it is because Hamas is probably hiding behind them. Those evil Hamas, they made us kill all those civilians. They were hiding inside the schools and the hospitals. They were hiding underneath those 2- and 3-year-olds. That's Israel's excuse. And if you don't accept that justification, then you are clearly an anti-Semitic Jew-hating Hitler lover who wants the gas chambers to come back and murder Jewish babies. Now, Ehud Olmert is facing trial for massive corruption, and I guess he's beginning to realize the evidence is very much against him. And he's calling former British Prime Minister Tony Blair as a character witness. Talk about desperation on the cusp of madness. I mean, Tony Blair, the dodgy dossier, all the rest of that stuff, that's like calling, the Don Corleone as a character witness in your own trial. That's not a name that you really want to be associated with. But apparently Ehud Olmert is hoping that Tony Blair's star power will prevail. Anyway, story out of RIMF.com. U.S.-dominated NATO readying for war on Russia. And yes, we see the signs of it all the time. Is it an absolute given? Well, certainly in Washington, D.C. is. Wall Street and Washington, D.C. are desperate for a war against a peer behind which they can duck the responsibility for destroying the nation's economy. Now, it's not 100% guaranteed because a lot of the European nations that are members of NATO are not wanting to go along with this. And just like we're seeing Greece getting ready to get out of the European Union, we might conceivably actually see member nations of NATO saying, we've changed our mind, we're out of here. We do not want another world war fought on our ground, which is where it's going to be happening. This push through NATO for a war on Russia could actually wind up destroying NATO itself, which might not be a bad thing at all. Meanwhile, over in a court in Austria, in Vienna, a court that's looking into some of what's been going on with Ukraine has basically revealed Victoria Nuland, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, attempted to pressure the former president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, the elected president, the one that got kicked out, into accepting Ukrainian association integration into the European Union by threatening to arrest and extradite Ukrainian oligarch Dmitry Firtash and just toss him in jail on the basis of some bribery accusations against him in India from years ago. So Nuland at first tried to blackmail Yanukovych into bringing Ukraine into the European Union, even though the Ukrainian people and Yanukovych wanted to go with Russia, which was offering a better deal. And when Yanukovych refused, that's when they decided, we're going to have to just take him out, put in our own guy, Poroshenko. Yes, he'll do a swell, bang-up job in bringing Ukraine into the European Union. I don't think we can count Ukraine as a success in U.S. foreign policy at this point here. Now, Jimmy Carter is out there talking with people around the world and finding out what's going on and basically saying that reunification of Crimea with Russia was inevitable because it's something the people of Crimea have been wanting all along. And he's out there putting this in the public record here because the official propaganda from the United States of America is that Putin stole Crimea. Those poor Crimean people, they love their junta in Kiev. They absolutely loved being ruled by a puppet ruler to strip off their resources and wealth and give it to the money junkies. And Putin came in and he stole Crimea. No, he didn't. Crimea held a referendum for independence, which they are allowed to do under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The right to self-determination. They voted to say we're an independent country. Then they voted to say we would like to merge with Russia. Russia said, sure, come on board. That's how it all happened. And at that point, the other Eastern Ukrainian districts, whose historical roots are linked to Russia, decided they were going to do the same thing. And that's when Poroshenko, funded by the U.S. and Europe, started this war to reconquer Ukraine and bring them back into the European Union. Because the value of Ukraine, the monetary value, is primarily in those manufacturing districts, which are over there in the east. Unfortunately, they've all been bombed to rubble, so not much reason to continue other than vanity and ego run amok. Now, turning to the economy, the indicators are bad. A lot of people are out there saying it's just a matter of time. It's hard to know when because the money junkies and the government keep changing the rules and they keep cranking up the printing presses, but we know it's coming at some point. U.S. fears a European Lehman Brothers moment, meaning a Greek default, even though the American Wall Street ratings agencies have already said we're not going to call it a default. So you can't cash in those credit default swaps. We're going to call it a shrunk or a FISBIN or something like that, okay? But it's not a default, and we don't have to pay off on all those credit default swaps. But it is going to create a very unstable situation, and all of those people who are losing money to the Greek debt problem and are not being reimbursed by the credit default swaps, they themselves will be in trouble. And we're likely to see a cascade ripple all across Europe. And yes, even though Wall Street has now protected itself, it's going to hit the U.S. economy. It can't help but do it. That's the downside of economic globalism. The fire doors are propped open, the watertight bulkheads wide open. It's going to hit. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we have been commenting that one of the reasons our country is in such terrible trouble is that Wall Street got it into their heads that they didn't need to make products or have anything to sell, that they were going to be the bankers to the world, that everybody would come and borrow U.S. dollars at interest. All the world's natural resources would be traded for the U.S. dollars, and they would just make money off of that, which is not very good for the rest of us in America who are not part of the banking cartel. And we have seen America's manufacturing decline over the last few decades. And now we are looking at a situation where the United States of America is running a $40 billion, with a B, dollar trade deficit every month. That's $500 billion per year. In other words, the American people are importing $500 billion worth of goods more every year than they are able to export. That is a disaster in the making, and it's been at that level going back years. Now, an article over here at Zero Hedge is saying the U.S. trade deficit soars to its worst since the 2008 crisis, and when that trade deficit is calculated in, the first quarter GDP is going to be shoved down into the negative territory, indicating that, yes, in fact, we are heading back into a recession. Or let's be very accurate. We have been in an ongoing series of slips and slides and recessions and depressions, whatever they want to call them. They keep changing the word. Don't want to call it a depression. People remember the 1930s. We'll call it a recession. It sounds kinder and gentler. It's only a recession. It's only a slump. It's only a shrunk. Don't need to worry about that. Now, over in Donetsk, they have just nationalized all their banks. Overnight, they went from a system with a private central bank to a state bank. And, of course, immediately NATO is in a tizzy. How you can't do that? You know, we cannot allow a nation that's not enslaved to a private central bank because it makes us nations who are enslaved to a private central bank look like a bunch of pussies. So the world banking cartel is out there telling Poroshenko, you go into Donetsk and you slap him around and you make him accept a new private central bank because that's the way we work. They cannot allow any nation to operate without a private central bank because they can't compete with that. And again, look at the public bank in North Dakota. Corporate media is not going to pay any attention to them. They're in profits. They're not in trouble. They provide low-interest financing to the government for infrastructure. And, for that matter, low-interest financing to the people of North Dakota. And they're doing great. The only part that's missing from the equation are the bank owners, private bank owners, living in palaces at everybody else's expense. And I think we can probably agree that maybe we're ready for a world in which we don't have the owners of banks living like potentates of old amid piles of treasure. I don't think we really need that for society. The bankers need it because they're money junkies. They're addicts. I don't think we need that. North Dakota proves we can get along better without it. The early United States proved we get along better without that. Now, over in France, their economy has flatlined. Another attempt at quantitative easing has failed yet again. It doesn't work. It's basically legalized counterfeiting is what they're doing. And they'll create all this new money, and they'll pour it all over the financial centers to keep the ledgers in the black, looking good, but it's not actually improving the economy. And remember, every time a private central bank starts creating money out of thin air to give to their financial buddies on Wall Street or over in Paris, it erodes the value of the money you have in your pocket that you've already worked for, that you've saved, that you've got in the mayonnaise jar buried out by the pineapple plantation. It's like Lord Voldemort waving his wand and the wealth vanishes like magic from your pocket and shows up in the pockets of the bankers. Is it any wonder that while the median wealth and income of the American people has gone into the Al-Qaeda, the money junkies' wealth has doubled because they're just making it for themselves. That's really how simple it all is. That's all quantitative easing was. We're in trouble. We can't make the economy work. Let's print up a whole new bunch of money and give it to ourselves, and we're looking good. And the corporate media will try and convince all of America that if the money junkies are doing good, then everything just has to be fine. No, it isn't. Now then, the Council on Foreign Relations, which, let's be honest, it's basically Wall Street's foreign policy body. They've issued a major report saying China must be defeated because it might become a bigger economic power in the world than the United States. Yeah, because China manufactures stuff for sale. And yes, some of what China manufactures is junk, but China basically will make whatever the importer wants. If somebody at Walmart says, I want the cheapest possible tea kettle that only has to last a couple of weeks out of the warranty so that the customers will come back and buy another one, the Chinese will say, well, if that's what you want, sure, here's a piece of crud, piece of junk tea kettle. That's what they'll deliver. They'll deliver what they're told to deliver. On the other hand, look at some of the products like, the iPhone. That's made in China, and they did a really good job on that. And you know something? There isn't anybody in the United States who can make this. The way to wealth for a nation and its people is you've got to have products to sell. Wall Street is living under this illusion that if they take a bunch of paper money and they shake it back and forth real hard, it's magically going to grow, and it doesn't. So now the Council on Foreign Relations is realizing that America is in decline, Wall Street's influence on the world is on the wane, other countries are turning away from the dollar, they're going to the yuan, and the renminbi, and the ruble, and they're out there saying, we've got to find some way to defeat China so that America remains the greatest economic power on earth. They're not talking about improving America's economy. They just want to destroy anybody who's doing better. They don't want to pull the bottom up. They want to pull the top down. And they're saying the Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty is essential to the destruction of China. And the TPP and the TPIP, the Atlantic version, are in trouble, primarily because of all the secrecy involved, where they're out there saying, we're going to make these treaties, they're going to reshape the global economy, but you, the people whose labor powers that economy, you're not entitled to know what's going on. And yes, we're going to be surrendering governmental authority to multinational corporations. And one of the most alarming comments about this just came out where Senator Sessions came out saying that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership are living agreements, which is political speak for saying that even after these treaties are signed and ratified, the corporations who have written these treaties can change them after the fact. We're heading into a true corporatocracy, the rise of the corporate state and the waning of the nation state, all driven by the money junkies here. Apparently, U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen is involved in a leak probe over economic information that was leaked from the Fed to a group called Medley Global Advisors, from which they were able to then profit. And the investigation's ongoing. Yellen is denying any wrongdoing, but is very eagerly hanging over the names of other people in the Federal Reserve that she thinks might have done it. To save herself, I guess, here. Half of the state Obamacare exchanges are in serious financial trouble. That deal has never worked out for anybody. The insurance companies didn't get the money they thought they were going to get. Obama didn't get the tax revenues he thought he was going to get. The exchanges are in trouble. The website is still buggy. Typical U.S. federal government work. Scott Walker is out there, and even though he hasn't officially declared for president, he's out there saying that if he's elected president, he will do all he can to crush what is left of labor unions in the United States of America. And I've got mixed feelings about that. I understand in the abstract that unions are necessary to keep a balance between the workers and management. On the other hand, considering what the Hollywood unions were during my career, they were nothing but a pain in the rear. So I'm kind of wishy-washy on that one. We got to take a break for the news. We'll be back with Miriam Azizi after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3 here. And joining us on the phone is Miriam Azizi. We've had her on as a guest before talking about life in Israel, family law, some of the abuses people are having to deal with there. And Miriam, apparently you've got information about the current discord between the Ethiopian Jews and the rioting going on in Tel Aviv. So what's going on?
Hi, good evening to you, and thank you for having me again. Wow, you know, Michael, I came here to get the material for another book, and you live in a bubble when you're here. And lucky me, I got to be in a demonstration for the Ethiopians. We were there right in the middle when it started. There were 5 or 6 hours of parties, celebrations, Bob Marley singing, and very peaceful until there was a water bottle thrown, one water bottle at a horse. The horse kicked somebody down, and before you knew it, everything started. And it was so brutal and so awful, and we were right in the middle filming the whole thing. So I hadn't actually looked at anything outside of what I videoed because I didn't want to be biased about it, you know.
Well, are the videos available online, or can we get them online?
Yeah, they're on my Facebook page. They're not all there, but I can certainly send you every video that I took from the beginning until we left just before the water jet started. And we videoed, we saw the tear gas. We were right next to a small, like a cafe where you buy a takeaway, and suddenly everyone burst out. And Motti was with me, and he said, that is tear gas. There's no pepper spray, that is tear gas. They denied that from what I hear, but we were standing 1 foot away from that, and we saw that happen. And at the same time, we saw 20 or 30 police just rampaging through the street to catch one man, which we videoed being dragged back on the floor. And we were standing in the corner trying to keep away from the trouble, and literally, just inches away from the firecrackers hitting us. It was unbelievable. the menacing way that the police were organizing themselves, and you're told don't go to the police for protection because you don't get any, wherever they were, it wasn't safe. But the people were not, okay, there was one or two as it got incited, of course, but it took 8 hours to get them going, so it was very peaceful. We were quite stunned. Lots of Israeli people there supporting it with signs saying we're all Ethiopian, and very jealous that the Israelis are too passive to get up and complain about their own lives,
Yeah.
So it was an interesting experience.
All right. Now, we were hearing a story that the riots were provoked by the Israeli authorities attacking a black veteran of the IDF, who was a soldier who had served in the Israeli armed forces, and apparently he was attacked, and that escalated the situation.
There was a video clip that was taken on the Monday of a sort of unprovoked beating of Damas Picada, which was seen very much like the Baltimore thing. And so 1,000 Ethiopians marched in Jerusalem a few days prior. There was no organization of these people. They just sort of did it and said they'd come to Tel Aviv, and they did, and there were over 10,000 there. There were 135,000 Ethiopians in Israel, and they're planning to keep going. They're just not going to stop until they get their rights. Now, they serve in the army, they give their blood, they give their loyalty, but 51% of them are watched by social services. Their kids are taken more than, you can imagine. They can't go in nightclubs, they can't go in restaurants. It's completely apartheid. And over 40% of them have been in prison. For nothing. So of course they're upset because they don't have any civil rights at all. They're treated like nothing. So the Israelis were supportive because they themselves are subject to brutal beatings by the police and the social services stealing children on a daily basis, because we've just been to one today where a child was taken from the mother 24 hours after birth, and wrenched from her, and she was thrown out of the hospital less than 2 days after giving birth, and her child was taken just because. And that's what's happening to the Ethiopians too.
It's starting to happen here in the United States as well, and the description you're putting out there, the reason I was chuckling is because Israel's apparently issued a statement to the effect that, there are some racial issues in Israel, but it's nowhere near as bad as in Baltimore in the United States. We got problems, but it's much worse in these other places. It's like when they admitted to being apartheid, but said, really, we're nowhere near as bad as South Africa, so you should stop complaining about us. But, what you're describing there about the brutality against all the people, not just the Ethiopians. I mean, we're looking at the same thing here. They're trying to sell it as a racism issue of white police and black protesters. But we know that in the case of the death of Freddie Gray, half of the police officers who've been charged in his death are themselves black. And we know one issue here in the United States is that our domestic police departments have for years now received special training from Israeli security experts. And we've been joking about how the American police are being trained to treat the American people the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians. And now it looks like there may be more than a grain of truth to that.
Oh my goodness! I mean, I'm English, so I don't consider the police to be threatening, and I've been in enough demonstrations in England. But the only thing I was frightened of was the police. The way they armed them, the way they get themselves together, their tactics, how they marched around in little sections of 10 or 20 in lines, squeezing all the people, dispersing the people. I mean, I had the feeling that they would kill us in 5 minutes if they could. But they couldn't because the protest was against police violence. So how could they be violent? But they incited it, and they got what they wanted because there are always a few usurpers in there who are going to start a fight eventually, and they did. The argument of who was injured and who's not, I have no idea, but we saw lots of Ethiopians, being hurt. We videoed one that was kicked by the horse that started it. I've got that video. We were right there when it all started, that moment. And from there on in, they just set about, provoking everyone to retaliate. It was horrible. I've never been to something so, it looked like Beirut, at some point. It was unbelievable. All they wanted was to complain that they don't want to be treated like animals, and we were all treated like animals.
Well, I guess that's the way that Israel's going to deal with the racial issue, is just if we treat everybody like, the worst possible scum, nobody's going to feel that they're being discriminated against. And we're starting to see that also here in the United States of America, where, the police are just treating us all like we're criminals, and that's no more profiling, we're just going to club everybody.
I spoke with a man that very afternoon who I also have videoed, which will be going out soon, who spent, months and months in prison just because his ex decided it was a good plan. He had proof he hadn't been at the place he should have been, and he was thrown in with serial killers and drug addicts and murderers for no crime. And they're all coming forward. I can't count the Israelis who haven't been arrested and thrown in jail. And they are beaten, they go without food, they go without clothes, toothbrush, they're just thrown in prison at the whim of a judge or the police. It's just unbelievable here. I've told you it was bad before, but I'm here now for 3 weeks and it's worse than even I thought. Watch, and I have a story which I am going to bring out to you in a week or so, which might just get me thrown out of the country because it's so world-breakingly shattering that we're having second thoughts about when to put it out, because Motti will probably be arrested and I'll be thrown out of the country.
Well, maybe you ought to wait until after you're out of the country, because they might just decide to...
They'll find me.
All right. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with Miriam Azizi after these few words here. And, and this is the way the United States is heading. As the United States becomes more Zionified, this is the life that you can all look forward to, and your children can look forward to. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Miriam Azizi, who is on the ground in Israel and right in the middle of the protests by the Ethiopian Jews over the rather raw deal they are getting from their government. And Miriam, I was wondering if you were aware, there's a story that's been floating around that a great many of the Ethiopian women have been subjected to being sterilized without their knowledge, under the guise of some kind of a vaccination or something. Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard a lot about that, and a lot of people believe that it's probably true. Let's face it, there's no reason for it not to be true. When I know what they're doing to the Israeli children already, it's no surprise that they'd be doing it to the Ethiopians, and there is a lot of rumors, and most people believe it. So I can't say, I've got it in writing, but I've heard enough about it for people to say it's pretty common knowledge here. And I think that's partly why they came out as well. They're losing their children hand over fist, constantly. Their kids are just what you need to understand here is that you can take a child from a parent because you want to. So the social workers are above the judges, above the law, above the police. They just come in, swoop in, and take kids at whim. Last week, a father lost 2 out of 4 children. They just picked 2. And that's the end of them. They're gone. And they go into the American institutions for, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month per child, filling up the rooms, and the Ethiopians are easy targets for that as well. It's horrible. It really is horrible here.
Do they wind up eventually being, conscripted into the military, or, these children do grow up eventually. What happens to them? After they've been separated from their parents, and what happens with them?
What kind of soldiers do you think a kid will turn into if he has no family to love and nobody to understand him, and he's been drugged and he's been in a mental institution for half of his life? He's going to be a killing machine when he comes out, isn't he?
Well, there's this huge scandal going on from this Israeli NGO Breaking the Silence that's made up of veterans of the IDF, and they just issued a report where they interviewed 60 Israeli soldiers who had been in this last attack on Gaza, who admitted not only were they targeting civilians, women, and children, they were ordered to do so by the Israeli chain of command. And, obviously you have to sort of create the kind of people who are going to be willing to obey those orders. And it sounds almost like this grabbing of children and putting them in these institutions. It's sort of like military draft at a very young age.
33 a day are taken, on average, it's 12,000 children a year are taken from parents who are fit parents. Not the, 3,000 or 4,000 children that genuinely are abused or neglected, but these children are then being raped in the institutions, raped by foster parents. They're going through abuse all the way through. An example, this father who lost his children, 10 and 11, one of them escaped the emergency centre, barbed wire, etc., and they now decided he needs a psychiatric evaluation for wanting to get out, and that assessment will keep him in.
And I'm sure they have a pill to sell him for that, wanting to get out of barbed wire, that's a mental illness. I don't know if you've heard this here in the United States, the psychiatric cartel, if you will, have declared wanting to eat healthy is a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa, for which they have a pill that will make you love your Big Mac.
Yeah, stop eating fruit. It's really bad for you. At the moment, when I landed, my lawyer released a story, because I have a lawyer here. You have to have a lawyer here, otherwise you know one. And he released a story of a 3-year-old boy who has been sexually abused by his mother and or boyfriend. It's all there. We've posted it. You can hear the boy screaming. He's been held there for a year and a half with burns all over him. You name it, we've got the pictures. And the answer is he's clumsy. And because of the laws, the mother gets to keep him, and that child could die at any time. But because the lawyer has an attitude problem, he went to the Supreme Court and was fined for his chutzpah for daring to try and bring the boy out. And that is everyday life for these lawyers here.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Horrible.
Well, I think everybody listening to these descriptions ought to realize that if we allow our government to be co-opted by the Israel firsters any longer, they're going to turn this country into exactly the same thing that you're describing there in Israel, where there really is no justice. It's just, political connection, who's got the force and the power to do whatever they want. And in an environment like that, it sounds like powerful people are just totally giving into their basest instincts. There's no restraint whatsoever. And we've had a foretaste of that here in this country with the Franklin scandal. And, of course, Britain is going through that as well with their pedophile scandal. And, of course, the United States was...
Well, remember, we're paying for them to do this.
Yeah.
No one supplies you with money or me with money in England. We pay for the rights to see this abuse. Now, you talked about Zionism. I have done a straw poll, and I keep doing it. Are you Zionist? All the Israelis look blank at me. They don't understand the question. They believe Zionism is patriotism. It's being proud of your country. The idea that Zionists have the overview that we see outside is lost on them. Genuinely, they just don't understand why people outside think they want to kill the Arabs. None of them at the moment they all want peace. Inside, without exception, they want peace.
I believe that. I absolutely believe that. Ordinary people want peace. It's these money junkies and people like, these Israel firster members of Congress, they're out there shouting for war because they're not going to have to fight it. Their kids aren't going to bleed for it. They're just out there. This is a big board game to them. We're going to go out and we're going to conquer this thing, and they're willing to shovel other people's children into these wars. And I understand. I've heard from other sources like Steve Emsel over at Desert Peace. The ordinary people of Israel, they don't want war with Iran any more than anybody else. It is these governments, these people in these high positions of power, that they're just playing out their ego and their vanity, and the history books will record how I conquered this and they conquered that. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous to worry about how the history books are going to remember you, because I have it on good authority. We're not going to be around to read those history books anyway. And so...
There's a Holocaust going on today. I speak to so many Israelis, and they call the Holocaust now. It is now. They are being obliterated by their government, and they're in pain. When they cry out for help through the words I write, they are starting, it is turning a little bit, but they are begging and crying, help the people in here. We're trapped, we're suffering, we're poor, and no one cares, because our army is so big and brutal, and Bibi's such a, won't even say that.
And the media is absolutely, the media is absolutely cowed from reporting on that. Miriam, we are out of time here, but I did post a link from what really happened to your Facebook page so people can look at the videos of what's going on in there. And with this next story that you alluded to, when that is ready to be made public, please get back in touch with me. We'll have you back on the show.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. That was Miriam Azizi. She's on the ground in Israel. She's in the middle of the Ethiopian protests, and boy, it just sounds like for all the myth about what a glorious country Israel is for the Jewish people, it doesn't look like the Jewish people of any color are being treated very well there. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, and boy, it's almost hard to believe how bad things are in Israel for the Israeli people. I mean, incredible amounts of abuse that they're having to endure over there. All righty. Now then, let's see. Story coming out of Clayton County. Clayton County Sheriff Victor Hill accidentally, he says, shot a real estate agent who was showing off a house. And because he was the sheriff, was just allowed to go on his way. He's the sheriff. We can't arrest him. I mean, come on. Don't be ridiculous. All right, now then. Believe it or not, there's actually a move in the Congress to try and overturn the concept of corporate personhood. As you are all aware, we live in this Alice through the looking glass world where corporations, business structures, have constitutional rights to freedom of speech, while we, the carbon-based life form human beings, find our right to freedom of speech severely limited, especially when it comes to talking about Israel, where the corporation has been elevated over the human being, and that, of course, is a dangerous, dangerous social precedent. So, grassroots organization Move to Amend held a press conference at the National Press Club middle of last week to announce they had 6 members of the U.S. House of Representatives to introduce legislation to overturn Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, to make free speech and all the other rights in the Bill of Rights available only to natural persons, meaning human beings, citizens, not corporations or limited liability companies. And not too surprisingly, the corporate media is not covering this, not reporting it. Even though it was held at the National Press Club, not a word. Because the corporate media is owned by corporations who love having more rights than human beings, along with the implied right of immortality if they don't mess up too bad. Now, Lauryn Hill was scheduled to do a concert in Israel, which she arranged on the understanding that she would also be allowed to do a concert in Ramallah. And apparently the Israeli government is saying, no, Ramallah, you cannot do that, at which point Lauryn Hill, to her credit, canceled the Israeli concert, saying it's either both or none. And Israel's attitude is, you only entertain us, you only support us, you don't talk to those Palestinians, they don't even exist. Now, despite widespread criticism and outrage by the citizens of Canada, the Canadian government is getting ready, looks to pass this anti-terror legislation, which includes the very worst of everything that we are seeing in similar legislation in the United States and over in France. All of these nations, enslaved to the private central banks, are having to become fascist dictatorships just to prolong their reign and power. And a lot of scholars, experts, world leaders, even Vladimir Lenin said, when Western-style capitalism fails, as it must, it will inevitably become a fascist economic dictatorship. And it's happening right before our eyes. Now, the debate over spying continues. As you're probably aware, many of the more onerous provisions of the U.S. Patriot Act sunset next month. And they do not have the votes to extend that piece of legislation, because we are going into an election year in which the voters are just absolutely livid at how the government has stepped off the Bill of Rights. And so members of Congress who are up for re-election don't want to be on record as supporting this. So they tried to do an end run with a new bill, the USA Freedom Act. This is a whole new bill. There's no reason for you to be angry about it. And now we're finding out that, in point of fact, the USA Freedom Act will continue the policy of bulk data collection. Now, it turns out the NSA's claim that they were not saving audio recordings of the phone calls may have been technically correct, but another example of U.S. government weasel wording. Now, if you've got the newer smartphones, you're probably familiar with devices like Siri, which are very good at understanding spoken word. And it turns out what the NSA has been doing is they will take the phone calls and run them through software that will translate the speech to text. Then they'll save the text as part of the bulk data collection. No, we're not recording the phone calls. They don't need to. They've got transcripts, which are then available for instant computer sorting. All of this a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now, you've probably seen this series of ads for DNA to find your family history. It started originally with a project that I think was being put out by National Geographic, where you would send in a swab of your mouth, and I think it was $100, and they would come back and say, regardless of what your family tree says, this is where you come from, genetically. Which can be embarrassing, as the royal family of Great Britain recently found out when DNA testing showed that there was actually a break somewhere along the line between the current ruling family and the kings of old. So somebody had something on the side there. But apparently Ancestry.com, after they do your DNA analysis, they're sharing that information with the government without any warrant. Now, I wasn't strongly inclined to let them find out what my ancestry was via DNA because of the possibility of a disappointment, but I'm certainly not going to do it now. Alrighty, story out of PatriotPost.us, a winter to remember. They're looking back over this last horrible winter. Even Wall Street says it's a horrible winter. They're trying to blame the winter for the poor economic performance in the first quarter. February 2015 was a month like no other in our lifetime. January through March is the harshest winter since 1717. The harshest New England winter in the entire history of the United States of America. And the carbon Nazis are out there saying, oh, no, it's getting warmer. Carbon causes temperature increases. They can't go back and say it's just climate change and we're getting colder, because then the excuse to tax and regulate carbon goes out the window. If it's getting colder, let's put more carbon out there. There's an interesting article out there in Stephen Goddard's website, Read My Lips, No New Carbon. And basically they're going back to one of the alarmists in 1988 who laid out 3 global warming scenarios. Scenario C assumed no new CO2 was put in the atmosphere after the year 2000. Now, we're 15 years past that date, and atmospheric temperatures are below what was being predicted in Scenario C. And basically, this theory is dead. It doesn't match the real world. And that is the difference between science and propaganda. In science, if you have a theory, human activity and CO2 are warming the planet, and it doesn't match the real world, you throw the theory away. March 20th, 2000, UK independent snowfalls are now a thing of the past due to human-caused global warming. Obviously, we have had several record-setting winters in a row. Do they throw out the theory? No. Oh, no, there's a new explanation for why global warming causes colder weather. Really, the theory is protected. The theory is sacrosanct. We never question the holy dogma of an unmoving earth at the center of the... I'm sorry, that was human-caused global warming. We'll torture and burn those who question it. That's propaganda. We'll be back after these few words. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, Freeman Dyson, who's an award-winning British scientist, he's very well known, very respected, has come out basically saying that this human-caused global warming is basically nonsense. The underlying science is far from being proven or even clear. And he's specifically going after the claim that carbon dioxide is toxic or is a pollutant. And remember, when this whole human-caused global warming nonsense got cranked up, the Environmental Protection Agency declared carbon dioxide a dangerous pollutant. It isn't. It is an essential part of the cycle of life on planet Earth, because plants will take in carbon dioxide and through the process of photosynthesis will produce sugar for the plant to live on and breathable oxygen for us. Commercial greenhouses will actually increase the carbon dioxide on the interior because the plants will grow faster and produce more saleable crop. And Freeman Dyson is out there saying this idea that carbon dioxide is some kind of a problem is absolute nonsense. The more carbon dioxide humans produce, the better for the biosphere. And as a matter of fact, as carbon dioxide levels have increased by a tiny bit over the last several years, botanists are noticing that plant growth is improving. Areas that were desert are starting to become green again. The reason the global warming cult settled on carbon dioxide as the villain is because they could link that to human activity to justify control over your life and the taking of your tax dollars. Carbon dioxide is nowhere near the primary greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. In fact, the latest study by NASA is saying it may not even be a greenhouse gas at all. It may act as a coolant. But water vapor overwhelmingly is the most potent and abundant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, but you're not going to get people to pay a cloud tax. Methane is 10 times the original claimed potency of carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, but most methane comes from termites and deep crust microbes who are life forms far too intelligent to listen to Al Gore and his nonsense. That's why they picked carbon dioxide. We need something that we can guilt the people with, get their carbon tax money, get them to allow the government to tell them how to live their lives. That's why carbon dioxide was picked, and it was demonized. And the EPA went along with this hoax, declaring it a toxic pollutant. If there were no carbon dioxide, there would be no life on Earth. It's that simple. And there has to be a certain degree of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere to moderate temperatures. Otherwise, during the day, it would be several hundred degrees, and on the night, it would be hundreds below zero. The actual science is a lot more complicated than these sound snippets put out by the global warming cult. Remember when Al Gore said the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees? He's off by a few orders of magnitude. And Al Gore never apologized or acknowledged the error. He simply went around the web taking down every copy of the video he could find. He didn't get them all, I might add. Now, here's a very fun story. We've been talking about this as well. This is another one from Stephen Goddard. After hundreds of billions of dollars in research, scientists discover the 1930s. And this is a tongue-in-cheek reminder that all the talk about how the Earth is hotter than it's ever been before is an absolute lie. Earth was actually a lot warmer in the 1930s. The world didn't end. Earth was a lot warmer in the Roman and medieval warming periods. The Earth didn't come to an end. In fact, quite the contrary. The Roman and medieval warming periods coincide with the flowering of those civilizations. Roman culture and the Renaissance. Food was so abundant, we had time left over for art, architecture, engineering, and unfortunately a few wars. The global warming activists have been caught going into Wikipedia, which is fast losing credibility as an authoritative source on a lot of subjects. They went in there to try and sort of downplay the Roman and medieval warming periods. Oh, they weren't that warm. It was no big deal. Really, it didn't know. But it's warm today. They're lying through their teeth at you. Yesterday we put up this graphic showing current temperatures versus a decade ago. We're obviously much cooler. Wall Street's blaming the first quarter economic performance on the harsh winter, and yet already we've got NASA and NOAA out there proclaiming for all the world to see that April 2015 is the hottest April on record. No, it isn't. Now you know why those of us on the inside say that NASA stands for never a straight answer. It's all political. It's all about grabbing more of your money. The U.S. federal government is desperate to find some way to take more money away from you, to give to the money junkies, to pay off the bankers. And what's really kind of sick about this whole thing is Congress has the authority, anytime they want, to vote to revoke the charter of the Federal Reserve and bring us back to an honest money system. But they won't, because Wall Street are very generous campaign donors, and politicians will sell their mother for $1. Now, the carbon Nazis understand they have a serious problem. Young people aren't buying global warming because, for kids who are in public school today, they've never actually experienced a year where there was actual warming. And they've been experiencing harsh winter after harsh winter after harsh winter. And by the way, it wasn't just New England. We had a blizzard here in Hawaii. Town in Italy got over 100 inches of snow in a single 18-hour period. It was all over. And already the indications are that Australia and South Africa, or the southern half of Africa, are heading into an absolutely crushing winter this season here. But we have this story coming out of thinkprogress.org about a new online course that you can buy and take that will give you the propaganda tools you need to just keep on refuting those global warming deniers here. We will give you the tools and skills you need to put those people in their place and silence them. So the carbon Nazis are getting desperate when they're out there having training courses to push their propaganda. After several record-setting winters in a row, following predictions that human-caused global warming meant snowfalls are now just a thing of the past, everybody who's bet their reputation on Al Gore are desperate not to have to admit they were wrong or give up all of that wonderful funding to prove human-caused global warming. Even National Geographic jumped onto the propaganda bandwagon with a cover story last month bemoaning the fact that the public doesn't trust science. Science is not supposed to be about trust. It never was. Science is about provability and reproducibility. Under scientific method, anyone should be able to take the same raw data or materials, perform the same process or calculations, and come to the same exact result. That's what makes science science. But when the Hadley Climate Research Unit, a bastion of global warming dogma, was asked to share the raw data on which they based their alarmist warming predictions, they refused, claiming they'd been forced to throw away the raw data because they ran out of room on the computer disk drive. I'm not kidding. That was their excuse. Politicians today are trying to use the image of science the way Renaissance rulers used the church. They just traded in priest robes for a white lab coat, but the game is the same. This is the authority. You should trust them because they speak for God, and now it's they speak for... They have science degrees. They have gold things on the wall. Don't use your own brain. That would be dangerous. Just trust them. And even with all these cold winters, they're still pushing this dogma because it is key to their justifying more control over your lives, more control over your money. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got to get some... actually, I got to start working on the new version of the What Really Happened website, which is getting to be difficult. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, get angry, make good choices. Please call your local talk radio stations. Ask them to carry the Genesis programming. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.